All right, let's do it. We got a lot to tackle, of course, with fall veto session just around the corner. One measure could advance at the Illinois State House that would allow for orders of protection to lead to police confiscating firearms. That's obviously something we're going to be watching closely as we get ready for veto session starting October 24th. So we'll break down that a little bit and see what the proposal is and what could possibly come out of fall veto session with that measure. But we're all waiting for the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals to do something with the gun and magazine ban. We have yet to actually see a ruling out of that. We did last week have the Southern District of Illinois Federal Court hear the gun and magazine ban on vagueness issues. So Stephen McGlynn took that in. October 18th is when the plaintiffs have to respond to the late-minute filing from the state in that Southern District case. But back in the Seventh Circuit Court, you've got everybody's still patiently waiting, even though they heard that case back June 29th. Now, what's fascinating too about the Seventh Circuit case is some of the other things that are happening in other jurisdictions. For instance, news has it that the ban on butterfly knives over in Hawaii, that case, which is a Second Amendment case, apparently the injunction put on the butterfly knife ban in Hawaii is going to stick. So some judicial maneuvering that the Department of Justice has done, apparently that's going to stick. How that impacts Illinois' case, that's an interesting question because plaintiffs in the Illinois case pointed to the butterfly knife ban being overturned as additional authority in the Seventh Circuit case. But you have a couple of other things happening as well with the magazine ban in California and the maneuvering that's happened with the Ninth Circuit there. That's another case where the state's plaintiffs have said we want additional authority. Seventh Circuit, look at this. But you've also got apparently the U.S. Supreme Court again dealing with the measure on what exactly is a frame or receiver out of the Texas case. So that apparently is still in effect, the rule that the ATF has, and whether that's going to play any kind of role in the next year and a half or 2 years and how that case happens. So there's a lot happening in other jurisdictions, but here in Illinois, we're still waiting for the Seventh Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals to issue some kind of ruling on the Second Amendment case, while we also now await something out of the Southern District Federal Court on the vagueness question that Judge Stephen McGlynn has. So clearly there's a lot to deal with what is happening in the space of the Second Amendment here in Illinois. But what also is fascinating, and if you stay tuned, because we're going to do this each and every morning, all right? I'll be updating you on what's going on at Illinois with the State House and with what happens there. But you also have the state's gun registry. Now, remember, that started October 1st in Illinois. And when that opened up, people could register their semi-automatic firearms, their attachments, though there's questions about what exactly is an attachment. They could also register their 50 caliber ammunition. And if you saw last week, and I checked this morning, no updates, but the Illinois State Police laid out that 1,050 individuals had filed something within the first week with more than 3,000 or so different items, be they semi-automatics or be they attachments, even though there were only 17 attachments that were actually filed. So you've got very low turnout when it comes to compliance for that. But today, we'll review this tomorrow. Today, the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules meets. What is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules? It is the bipartisan legislative panel that reviews administrative rules. So the gun and magazine registry that Illinois State Police put together, that was put together by emergency rule. So JCAR now comes in, and they review these emergency rules. JCAR meets today at 11 o'clock. And that's just one thing that I talked with State Senator Jason Plummer about, but we also talked about his legislation he hopes to advance during fall veto session in about a week's time here in Illinois. That would say those who purchased weapons when a lawful court order was in place have a right to register those weapons if indeed the gun and magazine ban and registry is upheld in the courts. Because right now, those of you who purchased firearms during that 6-day window where the injunction was in place, you could possibly lose out of thousands of dollars in purchases during what you call Freedom Week. Here's State Senator Jason Plummer talking about that particular issue.
A little history here, between I believe it was April 28th and May 4th, a federal court ruling injunction blocked implementation of this gun ban. During that period of time, many Illinoisans went out, legally purchased firearms, and did business with local gun shops, whatever else. When that ruling came out, when that federal ruling came out that blocked the implementation of the law, I immediately reached out to the governor's office, the attorney general's office, the Illinois State Police. I know a lot of other people did as well, to seek guidance, so that we could provide information to gun shops, to gun owners, to potential gun owners, because we were getting a lot of questions from constituents. The Illinois State Police did get right back to us, and they deferred to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General and the Governor's office provided absolutely no information, silence, complete crickets for a week, when they needed to be providing information and guidance to their constituents, to the citizens of Illinois. On May 6th, the Attorney General finally did issue guidance after that injunction was removed. And they stated that firearms that were included in the ban that were purchased or picked up during that window would be illegal starting January 1st, 2024. So, when a ruling went against the governor and the attorney general, they went silent, and they allowed thousands of Illinoisans to go out, exercise their constitutional right. And then when the ruling was, or when the injunction was removed, they were immediately dropping information, basically saying, we're coming after everyone who exercised their constitutional rights during that week. And I just think that's wrong. Again, regardless where you stand on the gun issue, pro or con, it's the job of the governor, it's the job of the attorney general to treat all Illinoisans equally and to provide them information, not set them up to be penalized for doing what millions of people do, every year across the country.
And again, that's State Senator Jason Plummer. Chatted with him yesterday. He was talking about his legislation that he wants to make sure that those who purchased firearms during that week there was an injunction in place can lawfully register their weapons without threat of possibly becoming a felon. But it wasn't just Freedom Week. Remember, there were thousands of temporary restraining orders that Attorney Thomas DeVore secured for his close to 7,000 plus clients. Some of you probably were some of his clients. You had those temporary restraining orders that were in place that were later vacated after the Illinois Supreme Court ruled on the gun and magazine ban. But DeVore, he's back in court trying to deal with this. So you have Plummer talking about this as well, in particular how this is all part of the rules that this enmeshed in this law that has substantial questions still lingering. And he lays out that Joint Committee on Administrative Rules is going to be meeting today, and how this is all moving together, and without any kind of regard, he says, for the rights of law-abiding citizens.
Yeah, so let me go a little bit deeper, too, on a couple of things, Greg. Obviously, Jay Carr will be meeting tomorrow. I think a lot of questions are going to come up during that period of time. I don't know. Yeah, that's the amazing thing. There's legitimate, you mentioned Tom DeVore, who's filed a lot of lawsuits. There's other folks that have filed lawsuits. There's activity in the state courts. There's activity in the federal courts. A lot of very, very smart attorneys feel that this legislation is very flawed and it may not stand. And, I believe the governor and the attorney general, their allies, should support this legislation so we can at least protect these people who conducted business for that period of time, April 28th to May 4th. But more importantly, I think we really need to put everything on pause until we see if the gun ban holds. Because if time goes on and the gun ban is eventually struck down, people start submitting these affidavits, whatever else, what happens to all that information? This is, time and time again, I've seen it under Governor Pritzker and his allies. They rush poorly thought out, frankly unconstitutional, most likely, but at least at the very best, poorly thought out legislation gets rushed through, and then it creates problems for everybody down the road. If we would just step back, take a deep breath, do things the right way, implement solid legislation that doesn't need a bunch of trailer bills, that isn't constitutionally questionable, if we just did things slowly and smartly, it would lead to better government. It wouldn't put a lot of Illinoisans in a pickle.
So again, hearing from State Senator Jason Plummer about his measure and how he worries that legislation gets rushed without consideration of individuals' rights. But he also talked about the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which could possibly block legislation, or in
Well,
particular, it could possibly block rules that they don't like. And that is a meeting that's happening today. Here's Senator Plummer.
well, I think tomorrow is an opportunity
Today.
for legislators to get together in a bipartisan fashion and do exactly what I just said, kind of rein in the administration, take a deep breath, and kind of slow things down and do things the right way, do things in an even-handed way instead of turning every public policy issue into a partisan issue. You know, a lot of what we deal with shouldn't be partisan. And this governor and some of his allies tend to make everything partisan. And really, sometimes it's just public policy. And I hope JCAR kind of exerts some authority tomorrow and hopefully rein some of these activities in.
So again, State Senator Jason Plummer talking about today being the meeting of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules. We will be covering that meeting, and if indeed they talk about the emergency rules from Illinois State Police, we will talk about that tomorrow. So be sure to like, subscribe, stay with me, of course. I'll be writing about this later on, so if you follow me on X, formerly known as Twitter, you can get the latest there. But it's not just the gun and magazine ban that's going to be a focus. With fall veto session coming up, you've got another piece of legislation that some at the State House are looking to advance to deal with orders of protection, and in particular, individuals who have an order of protection against them, which, by the way, it's not necessarily guilty verdicts. It's merely just a finding that a judge may make based on any kind of evidence they may present. But there's no finding of guilt. It's just an order of protection, which is temporary. But if an order of protection is granted, as it is right now, you can transfer your firearms to a relative that lives in another part of town, or you can transfer your firearms to an FFL that you might know and would be willing to. You could transfer your firearms, essentially, from my understanding. Now, I'm not a lawyer, just a disclaimer here, but you can transfer your firearms. The legislation that's being considered at the Illinois State House for the 6 days worth of fall veto session would require police to confiscate weapons if there's an order of protection. Is that going to come up during fall veto session? Here's State Senator Jason Plummer talking about some of his concerns here.
Well, you just summed up the situation succinctly, and that's a perfect example. Veto session is about to start. They want to jam something through in 6 days, and they're still working on it. Again, we really need to take a deep breath. And I don't care if we're talking about Second Amendment or we're talking about the budget or we're talking about any type of legislation. So much stuff, and we've seen it with the Safety Act, we've seen it with so many things. So much stuff gets rammed through because it's partisan and it's taking advantage of maybe a news cycle or whatever else, but it's bad public policy. Or even if the underlying policy is okay, it's poorly implemented. And we need to quit rushing stuff, and we need to start implementing good policy that's well thought out so that it doesn't turn into a mess for people that have to implement it. It doesn't turn into a mess for the people who it impacts. And there's not a bunch of trailer bills to clean it up. So again, the process you just described is exactly what's wrong with how this governor and his allies think of the governing process in Springfield. As to the specific legislation, I mean, there's not a police officer in the state of Illinois that wants that dropped on their lap, right? We have a process now. The process seems to work. And folks who are opposed to the Second Amendment just want to make it tougher and tougher and tougher on law-abiding gun owners. So obviously, I have real concerns with the legislation, but we'd like to see the final legislation before we have to make decisions.
So when we talked about this last week, it was a question of when exactly they're going to pass the bill. Is it going to be in the first part of the 6 days worth of fall veto session, or is it going to be the tail end of the 6 days of fall veto session? They're going to have hearings on this, or they're going to gut a Senate bill and pass it in the House and do this really quick? And is it going to be a bill about carnival rides that gets gutted to be about orders of protection? I mean, these are obviously things that happen in Illinois all the time, and we'll be tracking it and covering it for you as well. So that's also on our radar. So not just JCAR happening today, which we'll review tomorrow, but you've also got this bill about orders of protection and police confiscation of firearms in instances where there are OPs So we'll be monitoring that as well. But veto session is going to be busy. There's a lot going on, including power, whether to lift the moratorium on new nuclear construction, whether to allow for Ameren to have right of first refusal for power lines. Those are obviously some big overarching questions. But what about the Invest in Kids School Scholarship Funding Program, a program that takes private donations for a 75% Illinois income tax credit to use those donations, again, not tax dollars, to use those donations to go to kids who are in a failing public school to go to a private school of their parents' choice. What's going to happen with that program? Because that is set to expire at the end of this calendar year unless legislators in fall veto session advance a measure to lift the sunset. Here's Senator Plummer sounding off on the importance of that program.
I'm a huge believer in school choice. I hear the other side always talk about opportunity, and they always talk about difficult circumstances people are stuck in. Well, the most difficult circumstances anyone is stuck in is kids that are forced to go to failing schools, who don't get the education that they need and the education they deserve, the education that the taxpayers of Illinois pay for. It amazes me when I see how much money is spent on education, how much money goes to some of these schools, and they utterly fail in educating future generations. I think it's tragic. I think it's immoral. I think it's sad. And we need to make sure that kids are given an opportunity in Illinois. And the best way to make sure kids are given an opportunity in Illinois is to give them the right to go to a school that's going to provide them the tools that they need to be successful, the tools that they need to compete. And too many kids are getting pushed out of schools, graduated out of schools, without the skills and the knowledge they need to be successful. And I think that's tragic. So I hope that Republicans and Democrats can put their partisan beliefs to the side. I hope they can look at the issue at hand, and the issue at hand is not enough kids in Illinois are getting the education they need to compete in today's economy. And we need to make sure that our schools are doing better. The best way you do that is to create competition. And the best way you do that is empower parents and students to go somewhere that they know is going to look out for them. And so I'm a strong champion for investing kids. I'm a strong champion in school choice. And I don't think anyone should fear that. I think everyone should embrace that. Private schools, public schools, parents, politicians, students. There's nothing, competition is a good thing. It makes everybody everywhere better. And we should not force kids to go to schools that lead to a lifetime of struggles simply because of the zip code they're born in. I think it's tragic, and I think Illinois should do better, and I think Illinois can.
So, Senator Plummer there talking about the Invest in Kids Act. Something else we'll be monitoring as we watch what happens during veto session on the ground at the Illinois State Capitol here, and we'll bring you the latest, obviously, that with our daily coverage here with Bishop on Air. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All right, if you like what you're hearing, it's incredible to see all the participation thus far on YouTube. It's some of the highest numbers I've seen, so thumbs up. But moving on, we've got, of course, other things that could happen during fall veto session. We'll talk a little bit about the migrant situation with William Kelly coming up from Chicago this morning. But are there going to be more tax dollars freed up for Chicago to deal with the non-citizens in the Windy City? Last week, you had Mayor Brandon Johnson reveal his budget, $150 million budgeted for dealing with non-citizens in Chicago. Where's he going to get that money? He's got like, $100 million plus hundreds of millions of dollars in a budget gap. Where's he going to get the $150 million more on top of the hundreds of millions already spent for the non-citizens? Is it going to come from the state of Illinois? You had Governor J.B. Pritzker and House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch last week downplay that suggestion, saying that they don't anticipate doing anything like that with a supplemental appropriation for fall veto session. Here's State Senator Jason Plummer's thoughts.
Well, it hasn't gone anywhere, Greg. I know that there's people in Illinois, I know there's people in Springfield that do not want to talk about that issue, but the issue hasn't gone anywhere. And it is a real problem, and it's a problem of the governor's making. And they have not figured out a solution to resolve it yet. We are putting huge stresses on our healthcare community. We're putting huge stresses on social service providers, on schools. And, the governor and his allies created this mess, and we will do everything we can to help them out of it. But, you kind of got to acknowledge the problem first, and they seem incapable of doing that. This is going to cost us billions of dollars that we do not have, and it's going to lessen opportunities and lessen services for tax-paying citizens of the state of Illinois.
So, some final thoughts from State Senator Jason Plummer when I chatted with him yesterday.
No, I think the fact that we're this close to veto and there's this many question marks speaks to the lack of leadership that exists in the gubernatorial administration, and I think it speaks to a lack of leadership in some elements of Springfield. We have real problems we're facing. We need to quit focusing on the trendy topics, and we need to focus on the topics that impact Illinois families. And some of the things we talked about today: spending, healthcare, education, constitutional rights. These are things that people of Illinois care about. These are things that we're responsible for addressing, and I hope we do during veto session. I hope we do next year.
So again, State Senator Jason Plummer there in a conversation I had with him yesterday, and obviously these are things that we're going to be focused on heading into the weeks ahead. And if you stay tuned, we'll have more to report on what happens with the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, and what happens with the gun and magazine ban registry, and what happens with the measure they're wanting to advance dealing with orders of protection. So that's all obviously coming up in future shows. So greatly appreciate everybody tuning in.